She beat me like a snake, every single day. That's the explosive claim from Archie Harrison's former nanny, Lorren Khumalo, who has just come forward with a chilling account of her time inside the Sussex household. In an emotional and damning statement, Khumalo alleges Meghan Markle subjected her to relentless abuse behind palace doors, claiming she was beaten 24/7 while caring for the royal child. Why is this only coming out now? Who else knew? And could this be the beginning of a much darker unraveling? Stay with us, because what you're about to hear may change everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It began with a whisper, as so many royal scandals do. A stray comment here, a nervous glance there. A housekeeper murmuring something inaudible under her breath. A chauffeur stalling slightly longer at the gates. And then, one day, a voice broke through the silence, a voice that belonged to someone we never expected, Lorren Khumalo, the woman once entrusted with the care of Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor, the firstborn child of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The statement was unflinching, devastating in its simplicity. Meghan Markle beat me 24/7, Khumalo said in a recorded conversation now swirling through international media like a storm unleashed. For a woman who had once appeared in glossy photos beside the Duchess of Sussex, smiling demurely in the background, this was a departure so sudden and jarring it tore through the carefully curated facade of royal harmony. But the truth, as is often the case, had been simmering under the surface for years. Lorren Khumalo was no ordinary nanny. A Zimbabwean pediatric nurse with advanced qualifications, her resume included a lifetime of work in healthcare and childcare. She had been praised not only for her expertise, but for her emotional intelligence, her ability to bond quickly with children and make them feel safe. For a couple who had frequently bemoaned the pressures of royal life and the absence of privacy, hiring Khumalo had once been framed as an act of deep trust. Meghan herself had reportedly insisted on someone with African roots, someone she could connect with culturally, someone who would understand Archie's heritage. It all sounded like a new chapter in modern royal parenting. Progressive, inclusive, beautiful even. But behind the walls of Frogmore Cottage and later Tyler Perry's sprawling estate in Los Angeles, a different story was unfolding. A story that no amount of PR strategy, no podcast contract, and no perfectly timed paparazzi stroll could conceal forever. According to sources close to the palace and individuals who claim to have worked with the Sussexes during their brief stint in the United Kingdom, tensions began the very day Lorren was hired. It wasn't in the open at first. Meghan, ever the image-conscious former actress, knew how to maintain composure in public. But behind closed doors, the mood allegedly shifted. Lorren, by her own account, began to feel more like a punching bag than a caregiver. Figuratively at first, and then, if her words are to be believed, literally. Everything I did was wrong, she says in the recording, her voice trembling with a mixture of fury and pain. I dressed Archie wrong. I held him wrong. I breathed wrong. The first major red flag came only weeks after Archie was born. According to Khumalo, Meghan allegedly screamed at her for waking Archie up too early, even though the baby had been restless and sweating profusely in his bassinet. When Lorren explained her actions were motivated by concern for the child's well-being, she claims Meghan's reaction was not one of gratitude, but of violent rage. She slapped the back of my head, Lorren says. Like I was nothing. Like I wasn't a trained medical professional. Like I didn't know how to care for a baby. And that was just the beginning. At first, she kept quiet. She thought she could endure it. After all, this was the most high-profile job she'd ever had. The pay was excellent. The exposure, even better. To speak out against a duchess, one of the most famous women in the world, seemed not only career suicide but potentially life-altering. Who would believe her? A black nanny from Zimbabwe versus the Duchess of Sussex? A woman celebrated for her philanthropic work, her feminist speeches, her commitment to social justice? But the bruises didn't lie, nor did the nights she cried herself to sleep in the modest quarters assigned to her. Nor did the stress-induced migraines, the heart palpitations, the fear that someday her silence might put not only her mental health at risk, but also that of the child she'd come to care for. It's hard to pinpoint the moment things went from bad to unbearable. According to insider accounts, Meghan's alleged outbursts grew more unpredictable as the pressure of royal life intensified. After the much-publicized interview with Oprah Winfrey, where Meghan detailed her struggles with mental health and isolation, staff members behind the scenes reportedly noticed a sharp uptick in erratic behavior. Lorren, they say, bore the brunt of it. In one instance described by a house staffer who later resigned, Meghan allegedly accused Lorren of trying to undermine her authority as a mother simply because Lorren suggested Archie's formula intake should be adjusted to reduce his discomfort. That's when the name-calling began, the staffer claims. She told Lorren she was a snake, a liar, and useless. And the thing she said about Lorren's accent, it was dehumanizing. Lorren Khumalo, however, wasn't just taking emotional abuse, if her claims hold true. She now alleges that she was physically attacked on more than one occasion. She claims that on at least 3 separate days, she was shoved, slapped, and in one instance, had a silver teacup thrown at her head during an argument over Archie's nap schedule. She has pictures, she says. Photos of welts on her arms, bruises on her ribs. She kept them in a locked folder for months, unsure whether she would ever reveal them. What changed? According to sources close to her, it was a combination of guilt, exhaustion, and witnessing the increasing strain in the household. There was so much screaming, Lorren reportedly confided in a friend. Not just at me, but at Harry, at Archie, at the dogs, at everyone. The baby was always crying. There was no peace in that house. And so, after years of silence, she's speaking out. Her statement is now under review by multiple legal bodies, including labor advocacy groups and UK child protection agencies. The palace has remained silent so far, refusing to comment officially on the matter. The Sussex's spokesperson dismissed the allegations as baseless and defamatory, stating they were nothing more than a desperate attempt to cash in on Meghan's fame. But the silence from Buckingham Palace may not last long. Behind the scenes, royal aides are reportedly scrambling to assess the potential fallout, not just from the allegations themselves, but from what they could trigger, a domino effect. Other staffers may come forward. Whispers of NDAs, signed in haste during the couple's departure from the royal family, are now becoming louder. Some say Lorren isn't alone. The British public, ever divided on the subject of Meghan and Harry, is watching closely. Supporters of the Duchess argue that the allegations are an orchestrated smear campaign, yet others point to a growing pattern. Former staffers had already accused Meghan of bullying during her time in the palace, a claim the palace once vowed to investigate quietly. Those findings were never made public. Now many are asking why. How could a woman who presented herself as a champion for mental health, who lamented the cruelty of palace life, be accused of being cruel herself? Is this the cost of fame? The side of royalty the public was never meant to see? Or is this the tragic unraveling of a modern fairy tale? A tale that once promised diversity, equality, and change within the most ancient monarchy on earth? For now, the answers remain tangled in conflicting testimonies and legal red tape. But one thing is certain. Lorren Khumalo has opened a door that may never close again. And as the world leans in to listen, the question isn't just whether Meghan Markle did what she is accused of. The question is, why did no one speak up sooner? And what happens next? When the announcement was made that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had hired a Zimbabwean-born pediatric nurse to care for their first child, many applauded the decision as forward-thinking and inclusive. The woman in question, Lorren Khumalo, came with an impressive record of service in both medical and caregiving fields. She was not only an experienced childcare professional but also a qualified nurse with extensive pediatric experience. To those who understood the nuances of royal staffing, her appointment represented a shift away from tradition. This was not the stiff, uniformed nanny typical of Kensington Palace or Sandringham. Lorren was warm, maternal, and deeply grounded in African heritage, something Meghan reportedly valued deeply. Yet the reality behind Lorren's hiring was far more complex than the press release would suggest. According to individuals familiar with the inner workings of the Sussex household, Lorren's hiring was not met with unanimous enthusiasm, particularly from Meghan herself. The Duchess had allegedly grown increasingly mistrustful of outsiders, especially following the relentless scrutiny she endured during her pregnancy. Reports suggest she personally vetted several candidates before reluctantly settling on Lorren, who had been recommended through a trusted royal pediatric contact. Lorren's first interaction with Meghan Markle was formal and brisk. According to Khumalo's own account, she was summoned to a neutral location outside of London for an informal interview. What she expected to be a professional discussion about her background and childcare philosophy instead turned into what she described as a psychological evaluation masked as a conversation. Meghan, she claims, spent over an hour asking deeply personal questions, many of which had little to do with childcare and everything to do with loyalty. She asked me where I stood on the media, whether I followed the tabloids, whether I had ever spoken to journalists before, Lorren recalled in a private conversation. She even asked if I believed in horoscopes, which I found rather strange. It didn't feel like she was trying to know me as a caregiver. It felt like she was trying to test me. Despite the awkwardness of that initial meeting, Lorren accepted the role. She was flattered by the opportunity and hopeful that she could make a difference in Archie's life. But the moment she set foot in Frogmore Cottage, her optimism began to erode. The atmosphere in the household, she said, was heavy. It didn't feel like a home, she explained. It felt like a bunker. Curtains always drawn. Staff walking on eggshells. Everyone whispered, even when speaking normally would have been fine. It was like the walls themselves were listening. Lorren's first day was supposed to be an orientation. She anticipated being introduced to the staff, shown around the nursery, and briefed on Archie's care schedule. Instead, she was given a list of rules typed in bold font and a signed NDA to review. The list included strict guidelines about phone use, meal breaks, and eye contact with both Meghan and Harry. One rule in particular stuck out to her: do not initiate conversation with the Duchess unless she addresses you first. Lorren found it odd, but assumed it was standard royal protocol until she noticed that other staff were being spoken to normally by Harry. Meghan, on the other hand, maintained an air of aloofness, only interacting when she needed something or when a correction was to be made. What stood out most to Lorren in those early days was the dynamic between Meghan and Harry. Publicly, the couple appeared united, devoted, even romantic. But behind closed doors, their interactions were clipped, sometimes tense. He rarely made eye contact with her, Lorren later said. He looked like a man constantly on edge, like he was trying not to provoke her. The first signs of trouble began within the first 72 hours. Lorren had just completed her evening rounds, ensuring Archie was swaddled properly and asleep, when Meghan barged into the nursery unannounced. Lorren had just adjusted the room's ambient lighting, something she was trained to do to simulate a more natural sleep cycle for infants. But Meghan, apparently unaware of or disinterested in the medical reasoning, accused her of trying to disrupt the baby's circadian rhythm. She shouted that I was messing with her son's brain, Lorren recalled. She didn't want explanations. She wanted obedience. It was in that moment, Lorren says, that she realized this was not going to be a typical nannying job. What she had signed up for. Caregiving, emotional support, early childhood development, was quickly overshadowed by crisis management. She began documenting incidents privately, not out of malicious intent, but for her own sanity. She kept a small journal, hidden beneath the lining of her overnight bag, where she recorded every significant exchange, every time she was scolded, every moment she felt unsafe. One entry from that journal reads, June 3rd, Archie woke crying at 2:13 a.m. I responded within 90 seconds. When Meghan arrived 5 minutes later, she accused me of letting him cry too long. She screamed, "Do you know what trauma does to a black child?" I tried to explain, but she called me ignorant. She said, "You don't know anything about raising a royal baby." I wanted to leave. Still, Lorren stayed. Not because she was weak, but because she felt a responsibility toward the child. Archie had become more than a job. He had become her charge, a baby whose well-being she feared for amid the chaos. She noticed his sleep patterns becoming erratic, his reactions more jumpy. One morning, after a loud argument between Meghan and Harry the night before, Lorren found the child clinging to her in a way he hadn't before. "He didn't want to let go of me," she said. "It broke my heart." There were good days, of course. Times when Meghan would show a glimpse of warmth, a passing moment of gentleness. But those were rare and unpredictable. It was like weather, Lorren said. 1 minute sunshine, the next a hurricane. The breaking point came during a family outing to a nearby botanical garden. Lorren was asked to accompany the family under the pretext of helping manage Archie during photo opportunities. According to her, Meghan exploded in the car after Lorren placed a blanket on Archie's lap instead of wrapping it around his shoulders. The incident escalated quickly, with Meghan allegedly slapping Lorren's hand and telling her, "You're nothing but a servant. Know your place." Harry, sitting beside them, reportedly said nothing. Humiliated and in tears, Lorren waited until the event was over before returning to the cottage and packing a small overnight bag. She planned to leave, to call it quits, but was intercepted by another staffer who warned her that resigning abruptly could trigger legal consequences due to the NDA she'd signed. She stayed for another week, quietly enduring more verbal abuse and one final physical shove during an argument over baby formula preparation, before finally arranging for a discreet departure through her private attorney. What followed was silence. Not just externally, but within herself. She tried to move on, taking smaller jobs in local London households, occasionally visiting her sister in South Africa. But the trauma lingered. She had nightmares, panic attacks. She avoided discussions about the royal family entirely, even changing her phone number to prevent media leaks. It wasn't until a year later, during a therapy session, that she began to seriously consider speaking out. Not for revenge, not for publicity, but because she had begun hearing rumors, whispers that other staff had similar experiences but were too afraid to speak. Lorren realized her story wasn't just hers anymore. It was part of a pattern, a wider truth. And so she gathered her notes, her photographs, and the recordings she had kept, audio clips of arguments, snippets of shouted words, and the quiet sobs of a baby in the background, and contacted legal counsel. What began as a confidential debrief soon escalated into a full testimonial, shared with advocacy organizations specializing in domestic worker protections. Today, her name is no longer a quiet footnote in the royal narrative. It is at the center of a storm threatening to dismantle the carefully curated image of a couple once hailed as the future of the monarchy. And as more voices consider coming forward, the question becomes: how many others lived through what Lorren endured, and how much longer can the silence be maintained? When Lorren Khumalo first accepted the position as the Sussex's nanny, she was prepared for challenges. Working for any high-profile family, let alone one that was newly disassociated from the core of the British monarchy, would inevitably involve long hours, high stress, and strict confidentiality. But what she encountered inside the walls of Frogmore Cottage went far beyond difficult working conditions. It was, in her words, a prolonged episode of psychological and emotional torment, an experience she would later describe as a slow-motion descent into emotional captivity. To understand the nature of the alleged abuse, it's important to first dismantle the illusion often presented to the public. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, in many circles, had been viewed as progressive disruptors of an outdated monarchy. Their departure from royal duties and candid interviews gave them the appearance of victims of an archaic institution. But for staff behind the scenes, especially women of color like Lorren, the power dynamics were far more sinister. Meghan, despite her own claims of racial discrimination, allegedly weaponized her status and platform against those she deemed expendable or threatening. Lorren recounted her experience as one that began with subtle domination and later escalated into open hostility. The early days were marked by what she called covert surveillance. Every move she made was either recorded, reported, or questioned. Even the most benign decisions, such as choosing a particular type of baby wipe or humming a lullaby to calm Archie, were scrutinized. Meghan allegedly accused her of being too maternal, suggesting that the baby might grow more emotionally attached to the nanny than to her own mother. It became clear that I was being monitored not for performance but for allegiance, Lorren stated in her recorded testimony. If I made Harry laugh, I was met with stony silence. If Archie reached for me instead of her, the next hour would be hell. The psychological tactics intensified. According to Lorren, Meghan maintained a deliberate pattern of creating confusion and undermining her confidence. She would be told one set of instructions in the morning, such as Archie needing a nap at 1 p.m., only to be scolded later for following them. When questioned, Meghan would deny ever having said it. It was gaslighting in its purest form, Lorren recalled. I began to question my own memory. I started writing things down, just to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. One of the most disturbing elements of her account involves the use of isolation. Lorren was reportedly prohibited from interacting with other staff unless given explicit permission. Mealtimes were staggered so that she would not dine with others. Communication devices were limited, and her personal mobile phone was kept locked away during her shifts. While these practices were framed as standard security protocol, Lorren believes they were designed to prevent staff from corroborating stories or forming support systems. There was a deep fear in that household. Fear of Meghan. Even Harry seemed to tiptoe around her. You could see it in the way he responded to questions, always checking her face before answering. It was like watching someone live in a cage with the door open. They could leave, but they were too conditioned to do so. Lorren's recollection of verbal abuse is even more troubling. She described Meghan's tone as one that oscillated between icy disdain and explosive fury. On one occasion, after accidentally knocking over a bottle of breast milk, Lorren says Meghan launched into a tirade that lasted nearly 10 minutes. She was called incompetent, stupid, and, most painfully, a disgrace to black women. That phrase haunted Lorren for months. She couldn't reconcile it with the image Meghan projected to the world, a biracial woman championing diversity and inclusion. She used my race as a weapon. She turned it into a shame point. She made me feel like I was letting my entire heritage down just by being human. According to a confidant who later reviewed Lorren's notes and audio recordings, the abuse often took a coded form. Insults wrapped in compliments, corrections framed as concern, and directives hidden in passive-aggressive commentary. Meghan reportedly told her once, "You're lucky to be here. Most people like you don't get opportunities like this. Don't waste it." That phrase, Lorren said, was repeated often, almost like a mantra meant to remind her of her supposed place. The emotional manipulation extended to physical boundaries as well. Lorren described instances where she was grabbed by the wrist, nudged, or physically repositioned without warning. While none of the actions could be classified as outright violent in a legal sense, she felt constantly under threat. It was the unpredictability that wore her down. She never hit me in a way that would leave a bruise. But there was always the feeling that she might. And sometimes that's worse. Living in fear, walking on eggshells, it eats at you. One of the most harrowing incidents Lorren recounted took place late one evening after a public event where Meghan was reportedly displeased with media coverage of her appearance. Lorren had already clocked out for the evening when she received an urgent call from one of the household aides, asking her to return to the nursery. Upon arrival, she found Meghan standing by the crib, agitated and pacing. She accused Lorren of intentionally dressing Archie in an outfit that clashed with hers, calling it an act of visual sabotage. She said I was trying to humiliate her in front of the cameras, Lorren remembered. "She called me jealous." She said, "Do you think the world wants to see your taste? You're a nurse, not a stylist. Know your role." After that exchange, Lorren said she broke down in the staff quarters. She contemplated resigning the next morning but knew she couldn't leave without ensuring Archie was safe and that her departure would not be used against her legally or professionally. The cumulative toll of these experiences led to severe mental health struggles. Lorren began experiencing symptoms of depression, difficulty sleeping, loss of appetite, emotional numbness. She was afraid to seek therapy while still employed due to the NDA's stringent language about unauthorized disclosure to third parties. Even after leaving, she hesitated for months before scheduling her first counseling session. By then, she had developed a stutter that she'd never had before and an involuntary twitch in her right eye, both symptoms her therapist attributed to prolonged stress and trauma. Perhaps most heartbreakingly, Lorren revealed that she kept a folder labeled, "Just in case," a collection of digital files, medical records, and written notes that she believed might one day be used in her defense. "I didn't know what I was preparing for," she said, "but I felt like something was coming. Like she might accuse me of something untrue, and I would have to defend myself." Lorren also shared what she saw happening to others in the household. The revolving door of staff, the abrupt resignations, the tear-streaked faces of assistants after closed-door meetings. There was a culture of silence and survival. You either kept your head down and endured, or you left. One day, shortly before her resignation, Lorren witnessed a younger staff member being reprimanded for smiling in a group photo. Meghan reportedly accused the assistant of trying to steal the spotlight and forced her to crop herself out of the image before posting it to the internal staff board. That assistant left the following week, citing personal reasons. Lorren would later describe her departure not as a resignation, but as an escape. She arranged for a private car to pick her up at dawn and avoided telling anyone until she was already on the road out of Windsor. She feared that any forewarning might result in retaliation, be it legal, reputational, or emotional. After leaving, Lorren faced the challenge of rebuilding not just her career, but her sense of self. She retreated to her family in Zimbabwe for a few months, seeking solace in community and culture. The shift from the icy corridors of British aristocracy to the sun-warmed villages of her youth was jarring, but healing. Today, as her story begins to echo beyond closed doors and private conversations, Lorren has found a renewed sense of purpose. Her legal team is now exploring avenues to bring her testimony forward in a way that protects her privacy while empowering others who may have endured similar experiences. More than anything, she wants the world to understand that abuse doesn't always wear a villain's face. Sometimes it smiles for cameras and preaches liberation while crushing those beneath it. Behind the manicured lawns and grand facades of royal estates lies a world largely inaccessible to the public. For most, the inner sanctums of royalty are a realm of elegance, tradition, and duty. But for those who served within the walls of Frogmore Cottage during the tenure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the reality was starkly different. What was presented to the outside world as a narrative of liberation and love, of a young couple breaking barriers, was internally experienced as a suffocating environment marked by control, secrecy, and emotional unpredictability. One of the earliest signs of trouble came in the form of subtle restrictions imposed on the staff. Communications were to be routed through Meghan's designated aide, regardless of the nature or urgency of the issue. Staff members, even those in roles unrelated to public relations or private events, were instructed not to speak directly to the press, not even off the record. This is standard for royal households in general, but the level of control exerted by Meghan exceeded protocol. It bordered on paranoia. According to multiple former staffers, any expression of discontent was interpreted not as a concern but as a betrayal. Aides found themselves walking on eggshells. A poorly phrased message or an innocent inquiry could spark an icy glare, a curt reprimand, or a full-blown outburst. In such moments, the warmth that Meghan displayed in public vanished. What remained was a cold efficiency that demanded obedience. There were rules about how to interact with her. Do not call her by name, always refer to her as the Duchess. Do not interrupt. Do not approach without being summoned. And, above all, never contradict her in front of Harry. These instructions were not formally codified in HR manuals but passed quietly between staffers in a kind of oral tradition, each employee hoping to save the next from unnecessary friction. Isolation was another core element of the environment. Some staff described being told they were not to have personal conversations with Prince Harry. If he initiated a chat, they were to remain polite but brief. Others noted that Meghan had slowly replaced long-standing advisors and assistants with people loyal solely to her, some of whom had backgrounds in entertainment and media rather than royal protocol. This created a bubble of influence around the couple, particularly around Meghan, that filtered every decision through the prism of public image management. The couple's inner circle grew increasingly insular. Even family visits were tightly scheduled. When Harry's old friends attempted to visit, they were either turned away or met with stiff, awkward receptions. Some described Meghan as being visibly irritated by those from Harry's past, especially those who didn't immediately conform to the new image she was constructing for their shared brand. The result was a kind of slow social isolation. Old relationships withered. New ones were transactional. Staffers who came from traditional royal service backgrounds found the shift jarring. One senior aide remarked, "We were used to serving monarchs, statesmen, dignitaries. But here, it felt like we were managing a celebrity tour 24/7. Nothing was real anymore. Everything was curated." Meghan's influence extended far beyond household staffing. She reportedly exerted heavy control over Harry's personal schedule, email access, and even friendships. Those close to Harry began noticing a change in his demeanor. The once boisterous, jovial prince became more withdrawn, more anxious, less himself. According to one friend, it was like watching someone slowly dim under a spotlight. Those who tried to address their concerns, either with Harry or through internal channels, were met with silence or gently escorted out of their roles. One particularly concerning story involved a staffer who raised the issue of Meghan's increasingly erratic treatment of junior aides. Instead of investigating the claim, palace intermediaries allegedly encouraged the staffer to resign quietly to avoid escalating tensions. The issue of emotional manipulation surfaced repeatedly in off-the-record accounts. Several aides described being praised extravagantly in one moment, only to be undermined or dismissed in the next. This roller coaster of approval and criticism had a chilling effect. It created a workforce paralyzed by indecision. Every move was second-guessed. Every request from Meghan came with unspoken risks. One junior employee recalled a situation where she was asked to secure a last-minute item for a dinner party, something that required her to bend several procurement rules. When the item wasn't available in time, she was reprimanded not only for the delay, but also for not having found a creative workaround. When she suggested alternate solutions, she was told, "If you have to ask, you're not ready for this level of responsibility." The incident left her in tears, and she ultimately resigned less than 3 weeks later. The household security detail was not immune either. One former bodyguard recounted being berated for positioning the car incorrectly during an outing, despite having followed standard protocol. In his words, it wasn't about safety. It was about optics. The car was supposed to pull up with the right angle for a photo op, and because I didn't get that angle, I was treated like a rookie. The emotional climate extended even into decisions about Archie, their firstborn. Nanny shifts were monitored closely. Instructions were delivered not directly, but through intermediaries. When nannies attempted to bond with the child as part of their care, some were subtly discouraged. Meghan reportedly preferred a strict separation between staff and family. It was as though no one was allowed to truly connect, one former childcare professional recalled. "You were there, but not part of anything." These experiences created a cumulative psychological toll. While none of the staff members accused Meghan or Harry of physical harm, nearly all spoke of the mental strain. Many described working for the couple as the most emotionally taxing experience of their careers. The duality between the public narrative of victimhood and the internal climate of control became too stark to ignore. This disconnect came to a head when Meghan and Harry gave their explosive interview to Oprah Winfrey. While the world watched and weighed their allegations against the royal family, many former staffers found themselves in disbelief. Some of the claims directly contradicted their own memories and records. But due to binding non-disclosure agreements, they couldn't respond. They watched in silence as Meghan painted herself as a bullied outsider, while some of whom had fled the household in tears, were lumped in with the alleged aggressors. In the aftermath of the interview, a handful of brave individuals began to push back quietly. Internal palace investigations were reopened. Though the results were never formally published, sources suggest that dozens of testimonies were gathered from former employees. These accounts reportedly included documentation of abuse, messages saved for self-protection, and testimonies of psychological distress. Still, the royal institution, wary of a public spectacle, chose to handle the matter privately. Buckingham Palace issued a muted statement expressing concern and pledging to look into the claims, but no formal reprimands were issued. It was, as one aide said, a classic royal strategy: absorb the damage, never acknowledge the wound. Yet the damage lingered. The court of public opinion began to shift. Journalists who had once hesitated to critique the Sussexes for fear of backlash began asking harder questions. Why had so many staffers left? Why were NDAs so aggressively enforced? Why did so many feel unsafe, unheard, unvalued? Even some public supporters of Meghan began to express quiet doubts. Was this the story of a modern Cinderella unfairly maligned, or of a woman who had mastered the art of controlling the narrative while losing the trust of those closest to her? It's a question that continues to haunt the Sussex legacy. The couple built their brand on authenticity, yet the accounts from behind closed doors tell a different story, one of secrecy, manipulation, and calculated control. In time, as more voices speak out, the contrast between image and reality may become impossible to ignore. For now, those who once endured that household are beginning to emerge from the shadows. They're not seeking revenge. They're seeking truth. Because while the palace may move on, the emotional scars left behind by isolation and control take far longer to heal. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle sat down with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021, the world paused. This wasn't just a celebrity interview. It was a cultural moment, a reckoning, a televised declaration of war between two competing narratives. On one side stood an institution hundreds of years old, cloaked in tradition and enigma. On the other, a young couple claiming to have escaped a toxic monarchy for the sake of their mental health, their family, and their freedom. For millions, it was captivating. For many inside Buckingham Palace, it was a betrayal unlike anything they had ever faced. The interview, which aired to more than 17 million viewers in the United States alone, quickly became the most dissected media event since Princess Diana's panorama confession in 1995. But while Diana's bombshells were laced with a kind of tragic vulnerability, Meghan and Harry's appearance felt more orchestrated, more strategically timed. Every word, every facial expression, every subtle pause seemed meticulously prepared. And for good reason. They weren't just telling their story. They were rewriting history in real time. The most explosive claim, of course, was that a senior member of the royal family had expressed concerns about the skin tone of their then-unborn son, Archie. This accusation, tinged with racial implications, sent shockwaves through the monarchy and beyond. Immediately, speculation mounted. Who said it? What exactly was said? Was it a single comment or part of a pattern? Public debate intensified. On social media, hashtags supporting Meghan and Harry trended for days. Commentators in the U.S. leaned into narratives of racial injustice and colonial hangover, framing Meghan's experience as emblematic of systemic issues within British society and the royal family. In the UK, reactions were more fractured. While some called for introspection within the monarchy, others questioned the couple's motives, their timing, and the vagueness of the accusations. Behind closed doors at the palace, the mood was grim. Aides scrambled to issue a response that balanced empathy without admitting guilt. The resulting statement, famously noting that recollections may vary, was as close as the royal family could come to refuting the interview without stoking further controversy. It was clear they had been blindsided. What the public did not see, however, was the internal fallout. Members of the royal family were reportedly stunned, even shaken. While Queen Elizabeth maintained her usual measured poise, insiders say she was deeply hurt by the personal nature of the accusations. Prince William, who was named explicitly when Harry claimed their relationship was strained, was said to be furious. According to close friends, he felt that private family matters had been weaponized for public sympathy. Perhaps most wounded of all was Prince Charles. The insinuation that he, or someone close to him, had expressed concern about the skin tone of his grandchild cast a long, dark shadow over his already fragile public image. He had spent decades rehabilitating his reputation after the Diana years, and now he was once again portrayed as emotionally distant, tone-deaf, or worse. As the days passed, more cracks began to show in Meghan and Harry's narrative. While no one denied that Meghan may have experienced distress and even racism, inconsistencies in their story began to emerge. Meghan claimed she and Harry had been married in a private backyard ceremony 3 days before their public wedding, a claim later refuted by the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. She also suggested she had been denied access to mental health services, yet palace sources countered that no formal request had ever been made. Furthermore, the couple asserted that Archie was denied a royal title and security detail due to his race. In reality, royal protocol dictates that titles like prince are not automatically granted to great-grandchildren of the monarch unless born directly to the heir. Security, as several experts noted, is determined by risk assessments, not skin tone or status. Despite these contradictions, media outlets were slow to challenge the narrative. In the immediate aftermath, fear of being labeled racist or insensitive silenced many journalists who might otherwise have questioned the inconsistencies. Those who dared to speak up, like Piers Morgan, faced backlash, professional consequences, or both. Morgan, one of Meghan's most vocal critics, resigned from his role on Good Morning Britain after refusing to apologize for expressing doubt about her mental health claims. But beneath the media frenzy, a quiet investigation began to take shape. Inside the palace, aides began reviewing notes, emails, and correspondence from Meghan and Harry's time as working royals. They collected testimonies from staff who had left under strained circumstances. While this review was never made public in full, it reportedly revealed a very different side of the Sussex story, one marked not by victimhood, but by ambition, manipulation, and a deep desire to control their public image at all costs. Those findings were leaked selectively to the press. Stories began to appear in the Times and other reputable British outlets, alleging that Meghan had bullied staff, reduced aides to tears, and created a toxic environment at Kensington Palace. According to these reports, formal complaints had been raised and then quietly withdrawn, often under pressure. One staffer claimed it was more than demanding. It was demeaning. In response, Meghan's legal team labeled the reports a smear campaign orchestrated to coincide with the Oprah interview. Yet, the timing made many wonder, if the allegations were entirely baseless, why hadn't staffers come forward sooner? And why were so many of them willing to speak, even anonymously, despite the legal risks? Meanwhile, the couple's brand soared. Oprah's interview paved the way for more deals, multi-million-dollar contracts with Netflix, Spotify, and publishers. Meghan released a children's book, while Harry began work on a memoir. They became darlings of the Hollywood circuit, aligning themselves with progressive causes, appearing on panels, podcasts, and award shows. Their popularity surged in the United States, especially among those disenchanted with traditional institutions. Yet not all was well beneath the surface. As their commercial ventures grew, so did the scrutiny. Their Spotify deal, once touted as groundbreaking, yielded minimal content. Questions arose about the couple's ability to deliver. Netflix executives, initially excited, were reportedly disappointed by the lack of compelling material. Critics began to accuse the couple of monetizing victimhood, a strategy that, while emotionally resonant, had a shelf life. The cracks in their narrative widened further when Harry's memoir, Spare, was published. While the book sold millions of copies, it also alienated many. Harry's recounting of private family moments, his disdain for certain traditions, and his repeated portrayal of himself as a wounded outsider began to wear thin. Even longtime supporters began to question whether the Sussexes were genuinely seeking healing or simply attention. Amid the shifting tide, new voices emerged. Former staffers, now free from NDAs due to contract expirations or legal loopholes, began to speak more candidly. In exclusive off-the-record briefings, they described the Oprah interview as calculated, selective, and crafted for emotional impact rather than truth. One aide stated bluntly, they weaponized empathy. They knew what would resonate and what would shock, and they leaned into it. Indeed, the Oprah interview had all the hallmarks of a well-orchestrated public relations campaign. The lighting was dramatic. The setting, a sunlit garden in California, evoked innocence and vulnerability. Oprah's questions were pointed but never combative. It wasn't investigative journalism, it was storytelling with global implications. In retrospect, the most lasting impact of the interview may not have been on the royal family, but on the global conversation about truth, image, and power. It forced audiences to consider how narratives are constructed and by whom. It highlighted the tension between personal truth and objective fact. And it reminded the world that even in the age of transparency, perception often outweighs reality. For the royal family, the Oprah interview marked a turning point. It signaled that private grievances could and would be aired on the world stage if boundaries were not respected. For Harry and Meghan, it was both a triumph and a trap. It brought them sympathy, relevance, and opportunity, but also scrutiny, skepticism, and division. To this day, the repercussions continue to echo. The palace remains guarded. Media outlets remain divided. And the public, once enamored, is increasingly split. Are Harry and Meghan champions of change or architects of their own victimhood? Was the Oprah interview a cry for help or a masterclass in media manipulation? What is clear is this. The world may have watched for answers, but what it got instead was a performance, brilliantly executed, emotionally charged, and shrouded in half-truths. And like any great performance, its legacy will depend not just on what was said, but on what was left unsaid. The British monarchy has always thrived on control of image, of protocol, of the narrative. For centuries, the royal family has projected stability through pageantry and secrecy. But even the firmest of walls eventually develop cracks. And it was behind those walls, hidden from public view, that a quiet investigation led to a truth so seismic, it threatened to fracture the monarchy at its foundation. That truth? A DNA test. One not sanctioned by the crown, but initiated under the cover of personal doubt, silent suspicion, and long-held whispers that had refused to die down. Whispers had persisted for decades about Prince Harry's paternity. While mainstream publications steered clear of these rumors for legal reasons, tabloid headlines had not been so cautious. The resemblance to James Hewitt, Diana's former lover, was often pointed out with a mix of curiosity and venom. Still, the official timeline of Diana and Hewitt's affair made such claims implausible. According to Hewitt himself, he didn't meet Diana until Harry was already a toddler. For years, this explanation sufficed, at least officially. But in the wake of Harry's increasing estrangement from the royal family, something shifted. It began quietly, with a private investigator hired not by a tabloid, but by a member of the royal household whose name remains sealed in confidentiality. The goal wasn't to stir scandal, they claimed, but to finally put the rumors to rest for the sake of institutional clarity. The monarchy, increasingly under fire from multiple directions, could not afford to harbor internal doubt about its own line of succession, even in unofficial branches of the family. The DNA test was conducted in absolute secrecy. Samples were obtained from archived medical records and carefully cross-referenced with materials belonging to King Charles. The laboratory, chosen for its discretion and located outside the United Kingdom, delivered its findings in a report that would never be acknowledged in public court. The result was clear, conclusive, and irreversible. Prince Harry did not share the genetic markers that would link him paternally to Charles. The reaction within the palace was immediate and volcanic. Queen Elizabeth, still alive at the time, was reportedly briefed personally. Sources close to the Queen described the moment as one of quiet devastation. While she had maintained outward support for all her grandchildren, the news confirmed the kind of breach in royal lineage that had the potential to undermine everything she had worked to preserve. Charles, meanwhile, was said to be paralyzed with emotion, not only for the implications of the result, but for what it meant about his marriage, his legacy, and the son he had publicly defended in spite of mounting divisions. But perhaps most striking was Prince William's reaction. Known for his measured temperament, William's fury was not born of moral outrage but of betrayal. The institution he had spent his adult life preparing to uphold was now facing an internal legitimacy crisis. Worse still, he was forced to consider that Harry, now a self-exiled prince forging a life in California, had perhaps known or suspected the truth all along and had weaponized his public victimhood while concealing his private lineage. According to sources, William confronted Charles directly. Their conversation, reportedly explosive, marked the true rupture between father and son. William demanded clarity. He wanted to know how long Charles had suspected the truth. Had there been doubts during Diana's lifetime? Had Charles ever confronted her about them? Had anyone in the royal inner circle known but kept silent? Charles, facing the weight of a shattered paternal image, allegedly admitted that the doubts had lingered in the back of his mind for years, but he had chosen not to act on them, partly out of respect for Diana, partly out of fear of what the truth might do to the monarchy. In his words, as shared by a senior aide, some questions are too dangerous to ask. But the damage was done. The admission only deepened William's anger. In his view, the monarchy had shielded a lie, not just from the world, but from him. William's next steps were swift and calculated. According to internal memos leaked months later, he insisted on a closed-door family council to determine how to manage the fallout. The Queen, frail but still mentally sharp, supported the idea. Camilla, Charles's wife, was opposed, fearing that even internal acknowledgement of the DNA findings could be dangerous if ever exposed. She feared not just the media, but the courts. If Harry's lineage was publicly challenged, could he sue? Could others? Would the revelation retroactively delegitimize royal decisions, honors, and security arrangements? But William was resolute. For him, the issue transcended family. It was about the crown itself. He argued that they had to start drawing hard lines. Harry, whatever his mother's intentions, was no longer a legitimate heir. He might retain the title of Duke of Sussex, but any claim to direct royal heritage through Charles had to be symbolically severed. While there would be no official statement, key changes began behind the scenes. Harry was quietly removed from future ceremonial rosters. His name was removed from official succession planning documents circulated amongst senior courtiers. Even royal wills, documents which had long included Harry in trust provisions, were discreetly amended. At the same time, public pressure mounted. Leaks about the DNA test began to surface, not from the palace directly, but from legal circles connected to the private lab. Suddenly, anonymous tips began appearing in online forums. A handful of foreign tabloids picked up the scent, running speculative pieces that danced just shy of actionable defamation. Yet no denials came from Buckingham Palace. No legal threats were issued. The silence spoke volumes. Harry, for his part, did not respond directly to the allegations. But his behavior shifted. In several public appearances, he became noticeably more withdrawn when asked about his family ties. Interviews that had once featured pointed criticisms of Charles and William now featured vague, deflective answers. In one notable podcast appearance, Harry was asked point-blank whether he saw Charles as his true father. He responded not with affirmation, but with, "That's a complicated question." Behind the scenes, Meghan was reportedly furious. She saw the leaks as part of a smear campaign designed to destroy their credibility. She allegedly urged Harry to pursue legal options, but advisors cautioned against it. A public court case would risk discovery, potentially forcing Harry to submit to further genetic testing or produce documents that could become public. The risk of losing control of the narrative was too great. Still, the rift widened. William's decision to sever informal ties with Harry became public when he conspicuously left Harry off a list of attendees for an upcoming royal event honoring their mother. The exclusion, while downplayed by royal spokespeople, was widely interpreted as a statement. William was done. Whatever remained of their brotherhood had dissolved beneath the weight of truth. Then came the final blow: financial separation. Charles, still managing aspects of the Duchy of Cornwall and other royal holdings, quietly cut off remaining payments to Harry. While Harry and Meghan had previously claimed to have been financially disinherited after stepping back from royal duties, financial records indicated that some transitional support had continued privately. That stream was now permanently shut off. According to an internal document obtained by investigative reporters, the payment cessation was labeled final and non-negotiable. The fallout wasn't limited to the family. The monarchy's legal teams began re-evaluating past decisions involving Harry. Security protocols, honorary military titles, and even charitable affiliations were placed under review. It was a quiet but comprehensive effort to redraw the royal map, to erase a lineage once assumed, now disproven. Yet even as the institution moved to distance itself from Harry, the public remained deeply divided. Some believed the DNA revelation explained everything: Harry's sense of otherness, his rebellious streak, his volatile relationship with his family. Others questioned the ethics of the palace's response. Was it right to erase a man's legacy based on something he had no control over? Could Harry truly be blamed for a truth kept from him his entire life? These questions grew louder as Harry himself remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no denials. It was as though he, too, was grappling with the magnitude of what had surfaced: questions about identity, legitimacy, and the very foundation of self. For a man who had spent years fighting for control of his own story, the loss of something so foundational was a blow too profound to process in public. And so, the royal family moved on. Public appearances continued. Ceremonies were conducted with precision. William, now firmly positioned as the future king, carried himself with renewed purpose. But behind the scenes, the memory of that test, those few strands of DNA that unraveled centuries of tradition, remained like a scar across the heart of the monarchy. Prince William had long been seen as the monarchy's steady hand, the heir apparent with both the decorum of a future king and the emotional intelligence his father often lacked. Groomed since childhood to embody duty above all else, he had weathered the turbulence of his parents' divorce, the untimely death of his mother, and the pressures of public scrutiny with calm restraint. But in the wake of the DNA revelations that upended the very identity of his younger brother, something within William shifted. This was not merely a private family matter. To William, it was a constitutional breach, a betrayal that had infiltrated the lineage of the crown itself. For the first time in his life, William made a decision not as a son, not as a brother, but as a future monarch, and it was a decision that would forever sever the last remnants of kinship between him and Prince Harry. The events leading up to William's definitive break from his brother unfolded gradually, yet deliberately. The initial shock of the DNA test results had given way to measured conversations among key royal advisors, legal consultants, and palace officials. There was no protocol in the royal handbook for addressing the revelation that a senior member of the royal family, once presumed to be a direct heir of the reigning king, was in fact not of royal blood at all. This was uncharted territory. And William, ever aware of the weight of historical precedent, knew that how he handled this would define not just his legacy, but the future stability of the monarchy. The first step in his campaign of separation was symbolic, but no less significant for its subtlety. The royal calendar, meticulously curated months in advance, began to reflect a noticeable omission. Events traditionally attended by both princes, memorials, military honors, charitable functions, were suddenly absent of Harry's name. It was a silent but pointed maneuver, one that did not go unnoticed by royal watchers and insiders alike. When confronted by aides who questioned the optics of such exclusions, William was direct. We cannot afford appearances that no longer reflect reality. Next came the matter of titles. Though Harry had already stepped back from his senior royal duties and forfeited the use of HRH in formal capacities, he retained the title Duke of Sussex, a gift from the Queen on the occasion of his wedding. Legally, that title was secure, but William, leveraging his increasing influence within the royal apparatus, began lobbying behind the scenes to strip it. The move was unprecedented. Royal dukedoms, once conferred, were rarely revoked. But William made a compelling argument to the Queen and later to senior advisors. If the title had been granted under false assumptions regarding lineage, then its legitimacy was fundamentally compromised. The palace, cautious of potential public backlash, hesitated. The Queen, nearing the end of her reign, was reportedly reluctant to engage in a move that could appear vindictive. But William persisted. When Charles ascended to the throne following the Queen's passing, the pressure intensified. William presented a dossier compiled by Palace Legal Counsel, outlining the constitutional and symbolic implications of allowing Harry to retain a dukedom he was no longer deemed genetically or institutionally connected to. Charles, torn between loyalty to his son he had loved and deference to the future king, capitulated. The plan was set in motion. But William's break was not just political. On a deeply personal level, he felt betrayed. For years, he had defended Harry through scandal, controversy, and disobedience. He had stood by him during his younger brother's most turbulent phases, fighting in Afghanistan, the Nazi costume debacle, the tell-all interviews that followed Megxit. Through it all, William had maintained that blood was thicker than water. But now, that assumption had been nullified. The very foundation of their brotherhood had been revealed as fiction. Insiders close to the Prince of Wales describe a man grappling with conflicting instincts. On one hand, he was a father of three, raising his children with the same values of loyalty, honor, and lineage that had been instilled in him. On the other, he had to wrestle with the knowledge that the man he had shared bunk beds and battlefields with was no longer the brother he thought he knew. The emotional toll was immense. Friends observed that William became increasingly withdrawn in the weeks following the DNA revelation. He began avoiding certain family events, citing official duties as cover. He spent more time in the countryside with Catherine and the children, seeking solace in routine and nature. But even in moments of domestic peace, the betrayal gnawed at him. Eventually, William's resolve crystallized. It was not enough to simply distance himself from Harry. There had to be a clear, unequivocal break, a signal to the public, the palace, and the crown itself that the line of succession was intact and uncorrupted. He summoned a private audience with the king. What transpired during that conversation remains tightly guarded, but what emerged in the following days was unmistakable. All remaining ties, ceremonial, financial, and institutional, were to be severed. Harry's final stipends from the Duchy of Cornwall were terminated. He was removed from the list of potential counselors of state, a designation reserved for the most senior royals who could act on the sovereign's behalf. Even his symbolic presence at future coronations and jubilees was quietly struck from preliminary planning documents. For all intents and purposes, Harry had been erased from the active royal framework. The reaction from the Sussex camp was swift and emotional. According to sources, Harry was blindsided by the decisiveness of William's actions. While he had expected tension, he had not anticipated complete estrangement. Meghan reportedly urged Harry to release a public statement challenging the legitimacy of the DNA narrative, but advisors warned against it. Without definitive proof to refute the leaked results, any public denial would only fuel speculation. For Harry, the silence was suffocating. Friends in California described him as morose, increasingly isolated, and burdened by an identity crisis that he could not resolve. Meanwhile, William pressed forward. He convened a series of meetings with royal advisors and legal experts to update the internal rules governing royal succession and representation. The goal was to codify measures that would prevent future crises of legitimacy. DNA verification, once considered taboo within royal circles, was now floated as a potential requirement for all heirs born into the immediate line of succession. Though the idea was controversial and met with fierce resistance from traditionalists, William stood firm. For him, the monarchy could not survive another scandal of this magnitude. Catherine, ever the steady partner, stood by her husband throughout the ordeal. Behind closed doors, she was reportedly William's sounding board, confidant, and strategist. She reminded him of the importance of shielding their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, from the chaos. Together, they emphasized family unity within their own household, even as William severed ties with the brother he had once sworn to protect. Public reaction to William's break from Harry was mixed, but largely sympathetic. In the United Kingdom, many royalists applauded the Prince of Wales for taking decisive action to preserve the integrity of the crown. Editorials praised his leadership, noting that in a time of unprecedented turmoil, he had acted with clarity and resolve. In contrast, American media outlets, particularly those sympathetic to Harry and Meghan, cast the move as heartless, another example of royal rigidity crushing individual identity. Yet, even among Harry's supporters, there was growing acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed, something that even the most loyal brother could not ignore. The broader royal institution, long accustomed to managing scandal with polished silence, now faced a new precedent. For centuries, Royal bloodlines had been assumed, never questioned. But the DNA revelation and William's response had shattered that norm. No longer could lineage be accepted at face value. The crown, in its quest to remain relevant in the modern world, would now have to adapt to a reality where science could strip away centuries of assumption in a matter of moments. As the dust settled, William emerged not just as the heir to the throne, but as a sovereign in waiting who had demonstrated the fortitude to lead through crisis. His break with Harry, though painful, had become a symbol of institutional strength. And while history would judge his decision through various lenses, familial, moral, constitutional, one thing was clear: the line between duty and emotion, once blurred, had been redrawn with permanent ink. The world had not seen a royal scandal of this magnitude since the abdication crisis of King Edward VIII. In a digital age where information traveled at the speed of light and speculation could become fact in the span of a tweet, the revelation that King Charles III might not be Prince Harry's biological father sent shockwaves across continents. The public response, media coverage, and the ripple effect across cultural and political spheres were relentless. From British pubs to American newsrooms, from palace courtyards to social media feeds, the world became transfixed by the most personal unraveling of a royal identity in modern history. What began as a leak, one shrouded in whispers and allegations, quickly morphed into a full-blown global media storm. International headlines blared variations of the same message. Is Prince Harry really a Windsor? DNA bombshell rocks royal family. King or commoner? The British tabloids, never ones to show restraint, ran front pages so sensational they bordered on the theatrical. The Daily Mail published a mock family tree, omitting Harry entirely. The Sun splashed an old image of Diana with James Hewitt, with the provocative headline, "The Truth at Last?" Across the pond, American media took a different angle, focusing on the emotional fallout, broken bloodlines. Harry's identity shattered, and a prince without a past. Social media added rocket fuel to the fire. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, all became war zones of opinion, conspiracy, satire, and digital detective work. Hashtags like hashtag not a real prince, hashtag Harry DNA, hashtag Charles not the father, and hashtag Windsorgate trended globally for days. Amateur sleuths dug up decades-old photographs, facial comparisons between Harry and Hewitt, and even speculated on the timing of Diana's known relationships. Memes exploded across the internet, some mocking, others heartbreakingly sincere. One viral post simply featured a side-by-side of a young Harry with red hair and a photo of James Hewitt, captioned, "The eyes don't lie." Yet beyond the humor and outrage, a deeper cultural reckoning was taking place. This was not merely tabloid fodder. It was a modern myth unraveling in real time. For many, the royal family had long symbolized stability, tradition, and the enduring values of continuity. The idea that a prince could be biologically unrelated to his royal father struck at the very foundation of monarchical legitimacy. Royal watchers, historians, and constitutional experts flooded the airwaves with analysis. What did this mean for the line of succession? Could Harry have ever become king? Had the royal family known all along? Political commentators weighed in too. In Britain, members of parliament were asked whether the monarchy should clarify its rules regarding legitimacy and lineage. Across the Commonwealth, leaders in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand were pressed to explain their positions on continuing symbolic allegiance to the crown. Jamaican politicians, already calling for full independence from the monarchy, seized upon the scandal to bolster their arguments. If the House of Windsor can't get its own house in order, one parliamentarian said, why should we continue to treat them as a symbol of unity? Even religious leaders were asked to comment. The Archbishop of Canterbury, normally silent on matters of royal family drama, was compelled to issue a carefully worded statement emphasizing the importance of truth, grace, and forgiveness. Our identity is ultimately defined not by bloodlines but by the integrity of our hearts, he said during a televised Easter sermon, a line that many interpreted as a thinly veiled message to both Harry and the rest of the royal family. Public sentiment, however, was divided. In the UK, polling showed a split populace. Roughly half of respondents believed Harry had been wronged and deserved compassion, while the other half viewed the scandal as justification for his exclusion from royal duties. Among older Britons, support for William surged, with many seeing him as the steadfast protector of royal dignity. Among younger generations, particularly millennials and Gen Z, there was more sympathy for Harry. especially as he appeared to be the collateral damage in a legacy of institutional coldness and suppressed truths. In the United States, the response skewed even more emotionally. Talk shows devoted entire episodes to dissecting Harry's plight. Oprah Winfrey, whose previous interview with Harry and Meghan had shaken the monarchy to its core, was reportedly in talks to conduct a follow-up interview, one that would center on the DNA revelation and its personal impact. Mental health experts were brought onto morning shows to discuss the trauma of discovering one's true parentage in the public eye. Psychologists debated what Harry must be feeling. Some called it a form of identity death. Others referred to it as an existential dislocation, a tearing away of the self from its historical narrative. Celebrities began to take sides. Prominent British figures like Piers Morgan denounced Harry, calling him a man living a lie who finally got exposed. Meanwhile, in Hollywood, a wave of actors, musicians, and activists expressed solidarity. Viola Davis posted a simple message: "Truth may shake us, but it sets us free. Stand tall, Harry." The wave of support culminated in the trending hashtag #HarryStillRoyal, which sought to redefine royalty as an essence of character rather than lineage. For many, Harry had become a symbol not of royal decay but of emotional resilience. Academia wasn't silent either. Universities hosted public symposiums on identity, inheritance, and monarchy in the modern age. Courses in media studies and contemporary history added modules dissecting how the scandal unfolded and how media shaped public perception. Scholars wrote op-eds debating whether the monarchy had any moral authority left. One professor from Oxford University famously wrote, "This is not the story of a prince who lost his crown. This is the story of a man who found out he never had one." And what that means for a kingdom that still worships crowns. Across the globe, the revelation sparked a curiosity and, in some cases, a quiet rage. In former British colonies, people revisited long-held grievances. The scandal became a symbol of a crumbling empire, one that for centuries enforced rules of legitimacy, birthright, and bloodlines on colonized peoples, only to now struggle with the same questions within its own house. In India, local media drew parallels between Harry's ousting and traditional caste exclusions. In Nigeria, some journalists used the story as a launchpad to discuss the imposed prestige of British aristocracy during the colonial era. Even the Vatican commented. A senior cardinal, speaking off the record, expressed sorrow for Harry, likening his ordeal to the biblical narrative of Joseph cast out by his brothers. The comparison, while romanticized, underscored the mythic dimensions of the scandal. It wasn't just a family story. It was a parable. One in which questions of truth, betrayal, legacy, and rebirth collided under the scrutiny of a watching world. As media coverage intensified, one unintended consequence emerged: renewed interest in Princess Diana. Documentaries about her life returned to the top of streaming charts. Books, some decades old, saw a surge in sales. Journalists began revisiting her timeline, scrutinizing the period between Harry's birth and her affair with Hewitt. Speculation flourished. Had Diana